for what Trump and co. were up to at the DOJ with these obviously politically motivated probes, Bill Barr would be telling us how we have it wrong and we are the danger, not him, etc. And Trump would be talking a red streak. Instead, Bill Barr, the former AG, claims he can't recall anything about the probing that he was at the center of. And that was clearly about targeting Trump's political opponents. Instead, Barr told Politico he doesn't recall getting briefed that DOJ prosecutors did any of this, wasn't aware of any congressman's records being sought in a leak case, and that Trump wasn't aware of who the DOJ was looking at in leak cases. Remember, Barr is also the man who couldn't recall during testimony whether Trump had ever asked him to open an investigation into someone. Now, I ask you, what's more alarming? That they don't have a good explanation? That Barr would lie this brazenly? Or imagine if he really can't recall something he was at the center of. I mean, seriously. This story matters if for no other reason that now any of you who thought that these were the people who were going to clean up the deep state, they weren't. 73 phone numbers, 36 email addresses, including sitting members of the House Intel Committee and their families. Trump's Department of Justice demanded metadata on all of them from Apple as part of its unprecedented leak probe. They found nothing, yet kept adding and invading. We are just beginning to learn the scale and scope of what could be one of the greatest abuses of power by a president in American history. But again, this really isn't a question of fact. They are clear. This is about putting this fraud into perspective. The deepest of deep state deception that they promised to counter. The swampiest of swamps when they are the ones who pledged to drain the same. If you cannot own that what has happened here was wrong, then you do not care about making things better. Period. That's what matters about this. Trump wanted to change the game for the better. You remember all that BS? It needs to die tonight. Secret seizure of data of members of a co-equal branch of government, Congress. No good reason, no proof. I know there were grand jury subpoenas, and we will look at that. Remember, you work a grand jury at your own behest as the prosecutor. They're not there to defend themselves. There are no rules of evidence. You get to tell them what you want to tell them, and that's why everybody says you can indict a ham sandwich, which is obviously a much higher bar than getting a warrant. So, yes, there was process, but it doesn't mean that process can't be manipulated. And it can be corrupt, and we all know it. Schiff and Swalwell, what a coincidence. The two that Trump hated most. Apple says it limited the information it provided to metadata. You know what that is, right? That's about the numbers that were going around, but no names. And there were also account subscriber information in terms of who they said they were looking for. But the other side of the equation gets a little bit fuzzier. They didn't give content, they say, like who was being spoken to or emails or pictures. The company says the 2018 subpoena from the DOJ contained no information about who the investigation was targeting or why, but it requested information on the targeted accounts beginning from the inceptions of the accounts through the day of the subpoena. That's typical. They are usually tailored in terms of window. However, the gag orders routinely extend far after that. Why? To give prosecutors the benefit of time to work on their cases. Now, Microsoft tonight says it too received a subpoena in 2017 related to a congressional staffer's personal email account. And as with Apple, Microsoft was also subject to a gag. The good news is the plot has been exposed, and the staffers who helped lead the probe at the DOJ and questioned the same are still there, and therefore should cooperate in telling us why they did all this. Senate Democrat leaders tonight are threatening to subpoena Trump's two attorney generals it should be attorneys general, actually, to testify about the unprecedented action. A source tells CNN Jeff Sessions wasn't involved in the subpoenas related to the House committee because he had recused himself at the time from anything connected to the Russia probe. That's a reasonable assumption. It's reasonable. They should look at it, but it's reasonable. Bill Barr, no such defense. He wasn't recused. He stands accused. He reportedly revived the leak investigations. According to who? The people who did the work. A number of people who spoke to the New York Times, CNN echoing some of the reporting, that they were told to do it, and he was in the loop after he became Attorney General. Even after he was told that these initial probes had turned up nothing. Barr also took the extraordinary step of seeking to renew a gag order on Apple to prevent the company from notifying the subjects of the subpoenas that he now says he can't recall anything about. You don't buy that. So condemn it. Left and right can finally give ground to being reasonable. You know this was wrong. Period. That's why Trump is quiet since the news broke. Since when does that happen? Only when he knows he is busted. But remember, the biggest reveal here is that Trump lied to you every time he told you this.
You still have deep state, but one by one, we're getting them out. You have deep state bad people.
The swamp creatures are much deeper and much worse than we ever thought. And there is such a thing as the deep state. Who would think?
Drain the swamp. We're going to drain the swamp of Washington.
It is time to drain the damn swamp.
He was lying. He added the most swamp dragons, the most alligators. He had the swampiest administration. We've never seen people get kicked out of service at the rate or for the rationales that happened with his administration. And what we are now seeing is absolutely, by definition, deep state deception, the likes of which red and blue will tell you they have never seen before. Yes, Chuck Grassley says investigations of members of Congress are nothing new. Yeah, but why? You don't investigate them in search of proof to show they did something wrong. You have proof they did something wrong, and then you continue to investigate. Well, these were subpoenas from a grand jury. There you have it. No, that's just ab initio. That's the beginning. But then you had the same people who were asked to do this say that they weren't getting any proof, and were told to continue. That's the part that matters. His own Department of Justice targeted his political opponents, including this House Intel Committee member.
I hope Trump supporters who fear Big Brother see that Donald Trump was the biggest brother we've ever seen in our country, who did weaponize this to go all the way down the stack into, the private communications of people he perceived as political opponents.
Trump's like Nixon. Trump's like Nixon. Don't do that to Nixon. Trump is worse. He didn't use the DOJ like this. This makes Watergate look like jaywalking. What else don't we know about what they were up to? He was in office for 4 years. So the question is, how do we find out and what should happen? That's the question. But here's what we know, that he should have a period at the end of it. Trump was never going to drain the deep state. He was never going to drain the swamp. Play with your metaphors. It doesn't matter. He didn't mean them. He was the worst, and it is demonstrable because we've never seen anything like this. All right? Now, let's get a fair reckoning on it from a better mind than mine. Former Attorney General under President George W. Bush, Michael Mukasey. You'll remember, he knows Bill Barr. He put in a good word for him back in the confirmation phase, and he joins us tonight. First, Mike, personal before political. I've missed you. It's good to see you looking well, and I hope the family is well.
They're well, thanks very much, and I've missed you too.
All right. You don't mean it the way I do, but that's okay. Now, let me ask you this, former AG. When Bill Barr says, I have no recollection of any of these things that his own high-placed staff says that he was at the center of, what are we to make of that kind of I can't recall?
What you're to make of the statement is that the subpoena was issued before he got there. You're saying that he was at the center of these things. What he was at the center of, as far as I know, was insisting that leak investigations generally, not necessarily these, but leak investigations generally that had been languishing, as to which there was a great deal of pressure from people in the Defense Department, people in the intelligence community who are severely hurt by national security leaks, that those be prosecuted and pursued. And so he got somebody to take a look to see which were viable and which were not. As far as I know, there's absolutely no indication that he was riding herd on these particular matters or these particular congressmen.
Well, you do know there is an indication because there's New York Times reporting that says exactly the opposite. The guy he brought in was from New Jersey and had no experience with these kinds of things. The premise that it was based on national security concerns, they declassified a lot of this information as they went along, so they took away their own premise. But we have interviews in the reporting of people who said they told the AG, Mike, that there's nothing here, and he said, reopen, keep going.
He said to pursue cases generally. The notion of bringing in somebody from New Jersey with no experience, I did something very similar when we had a problem with the destruction of the CIA tapes. I brought in somebody from within the department, but outside Washington, outside the hothouse of Washington, to see whether there was anything there. He did that with leak cases generally, not necessarily with these.
Well, now, do you know that, or is that your take from the reporting?
That's my take from the reporting, and it's my take from what I know of what was pending at the time, which were a lot of other cases other than these.
Right. But in the reporting, it doesn't say what you're saying right now. It says that these were specific. They wanted Schiff. They wanted Swalwell. They wanted former Obama people. They found nothing, yet kept looking. I mean, just at the scale and the scope of this, Mike, have you ever seen anything like it before?
I have not seen any investigation similar to this. On the other hand, there are many investigations that happened for the first time and the last time. This wouldn't be the first time. If there were in fact leaks that appeared to originate in Congress, there's every reason for those to be pursued. Understand that leaking information isn't a game. Information is kept secret for a reason, and people who disclose it essentially are deciding that regardless of whether the information should be kept secret or not, they have their own agenda. They know better than the people who are charged with deciding whether information should be disclosed, and they're going to go ahead with their own agenda. That's unlawful, whether it's done by Edward Snowden or it's done by Eric Swalwell.
Yeah, but the problem is it wasn't done. They found no proof. Yet they kept looking and expanding. They kept adding and invading. And they were told by staffers, some of whom are at high levels and still there, so we're going to hear from them, Mike, who told Barr and others,
I'm sure we will.
There is nothing here. We are uncomfortable continuing this. And they were told to continue. And that Barr eventually had to go tell.
That's not what
Yes, sir. That's what the reporting says. But
that's not what the reporting says. No,
it is what the reporting says.
I don't read it the same way, but go ahead.
How do you read it, Mike?
I read it as they having been told to basically make sure that leak cases get pursued, which I did unsuccessfully, and would have done in Bill Barr's place had I been there.
Yeah, you would have done them, but you wouldn't have done them like this, I would think, seeing how you're someone I respect and lean on as a mentor, that you would have said, show us where the proof is of where the leaks may have come from, and let's go from there. Here, they never had any proof on any of these guys. This was not the Go ahead.
I don't know what proof they had. I don't know what reason they had to believe that information was coming from them or from people on their staffs. Nor do you. Nor do the reporters who wrote the story in the New York Times.
That is true. These were grand jury subpoenas. I actually said that up at the top. They had to have something to get the subpoena, but we both know that this is a very easily manipulated bar for any good prosecutor, and this isn't even like an indictment. This is a different standard. And I'm not saying they didn't have anything, but I'm saying that
prosecutors.
Mike, why am I
Prosecutors
asking? Mike, here, let me just make it clear why I'm chasing on this. I'm not bad-mouthing prosecutors, okay? They'll be able to speak for themselves. What I'm saying is
you're bad-mouthing Bill Barr. I understand you're not bad-mouthing prosecutors.
I am, and here's why. I can't believe he doesn't recall anything like this. It is beyond reasonableness that he would remember nothing about only things that are politically damaging. I can't remember Trump ever asking me about going after anyone personally. We both know how that man dialogues. We both know what he was trying to do here. Here's why I care. Co-equal branch of government.
Yes, and we also both know that he pushed back repeatedly on Trump, that he said there was no reason to doubt the election, that he refused to indict Jim Comey, that he refused to pursue a case against McCabe, that he refused to do any number of things.
He is the only man to give Jim Comey second place to abusing the platform. When he took to microphone and completely dissembled the reality of the Mueller report, Mike, and he did it out of political convenience, he took a step that no attorney general ever had taken or should take. So I do not see him as Captain Candor.
That is absurd.
You know what he did with that memo. You know that he shorthanded it and tried to make it seem like it wasn't what it was.
Absolutely not. He stated the conclusions in the memo, including the part about not being able to exonerate the president, which is a standard that's unknown to the law, as you know. But nonetheless, he stated it. He also checked with Mueller to see whether there was a problem with what he had done.
And Mueller complained about what was happening. And what was he supposed to do? He wasn't in control. He was working for Barr.
Right. No, he was working for you and me.
Come on. You know who was on top of him, and that's why he came out and did it that way. Look, all I'm saying is, Mike, this is about a co-equal branch of government. This is about going after the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee because Trump didn't like him, and going after the guy's family, going after minors, and never finding anything, closing the case, and then being told to restart it. This doesn't look bad to you, Mike?
Chris, prosecutors have subpoenaed the records of the families of people they're looking at to find out whether the family's accounts are being used.
True, I agree.
You'll remember that a congressman from New York who had a little sex scandal was using his wife's computer.
Absolutely. Hey, listen, absolutely. I remember the Wiener thing very well. What I'm talking about is the House Intel guy.
Okay.
They found nothing, and they kept expanding and invading. And look, at a minimum, you got to see what the Inspector General says, but we got to have these people who are in charge of it. We got lucky here that they're still at the DOJ, which means they can't opt out of cooperation that well as long as there's nothing criminal that's brought up, which I don't see happening at this point. But would you agree with me at least that this is something that has to be unearthed and revealed because it may be one of the biggest abuses of power we've seen?
Yeah, I'm sure we're going to take a good long look. And I also believe that we will find that an investigation was pursued to a dry hole, as many investigations are. But the notion that somehow they were trying to intimidate a member of Congress is ridiculous.
No, I didn't. I never said that.
You don't intimidate somebody by keeping an investigation secret.
I never said it. I never said it.
Others have.
Not me. Deal with one dope at a time, Mike. Deal with the dope in front of you. I've never said anything like that. But I will end on this.
Okay.
The predicate for this is that, hey, this was national security. And as you said, that's very important. But here's the problem. The risk of contacts with the Russians. Where's the risk of contacts with Russians that never happened? And where is the risk of a national security threat with dialogues that you had being declassified during the period of assessment and probing and investigating? You're declassifying the same information that you say is the risk.
It was declassified. It was declassified after the fact. What it confirmed was something the Russians probably already knew, which was that the government had a wire on Kislyak. Having them knowing it and having it confirmed are two very different things.
There are, but I would argue the timing.
That was what was confirmed, and it was confirmed.
I would argue the timing. This happened in 2020
afterwards,
when they were still looking at it and Barr was going to reopen it. That's when the Intel guy declassified it and caused a little bit of a problem for the continuation of this. I'm just saying it doesn't look bad. It doesn't smell bad. It is bad. This is one of those situations where if there were a good explanation, Bill Barr would have it.
So you've already reached the conclusion of the Yeah, you've already reached the conclusion of the investigation that you say has to go on?
No, not at all. I'm saying that
you've
the
already
idea...
reached the verdict.
No,
it is
sir.
bad. That's what you just said.
Listen.
That's what you just said.
Here's my take on it. Let me give you the context of what I'm saying. This is not a trial.
I got your take on it in your opening.
This is not, and it's a smart one. And you would
say.
give the same one if he wasn't your buddy, Mike. I understand why you believe in Bill Barr.
He's not my. Understand something. He's not my buddy. I've never been in his house. He's never been in my house. I admire his public career. I admired it before. I still do.
All right, I'll give you that clarification. You've never been in each other's houses.
He did things.
You were flattering.
He did things.
He did things. What? Last word to you, sir.
I was accurate. Pardon?
Last word to you, sir.
I was accurate in my description of him. When Trump wanted things done, if he thought the law required it, he did it, even though people attacked him for doing Trump's bidding. When Trump wanted things done that he thought should not be done, he didn't do them.
Well, this will be the ultimate testament to that proposition. What he did here and didn't do, and why. And former AG Mike Mukasey, I don't think I'd ever be talking to you about doing anything like this. And it's one of the reasons I need you on this show. I respect where you're coming from and why. I wish you well, and I look forward to seeing you again.
Happy to. I wish you well, too. Thank you.
Take care. He doesn't like me, but he knows I love him. Look, you have to argue through any political reckoning on this. It looks bad. Where's the presumption of innocence? This isn't a trial. This isn't a trial, okay? In light of these facts, the burden is on Bill Barr and the people who did this to tell us how the New York Times and CNN and common sense has this wrong. So let's pick this up with two more valuable minds. One of them knows exactly what it's like to be publicly targeted by Trump. Former FBI agent Peter Strzok, who once worked on the Russia investigation, and a former acting AG. How does he think the DOJ's Inspector General should be going on about this? And what do these two guys think about what they just heard from former AG Mukasey? Next. Here to respond to the Trump DOJ alleged abuse of power and what we heard from former AG Mike Mukasey is former acting U.S. Attorney General Stuart Gerson, as well as Peter Strzok, former FBI chief of counterespionage and author of Compromised, Counterintelligence and the Threat of Donald J. Trump. Gentlemen, thank you. First, let's get our bearings here. I'll start with you, Mr. Gerson. Have you ever seen anything like what is being reported?
No, I haven't, except as was said in the earlier segment, there's a lot here that, at least in hindsight, you can say echoes the enemies list of the 1970s.
And Peter, the idea that, well, look, they went to a grand jury to get the subpoena, so obviously they had plenty of proof for this. So it's all on the level.
Yeah, no, I don't agree with that, Chris. I mean, clearly I agree with Attorney General Mukasey to the extent that there are leaks of information that the government needs to investigate and, if appropriate, prosecute. But the scope of this activity, the breadth of all the various individuals that were subpoenaed, I've never seen anything like it in my 20 years in the FBI.
And also a key aspect, the corollary to Pete's point, Stuart, is that they found nothing and yet kept going to the point where they had people who were, junior to where Peter was, but where they were coming to people and saying, we're not finding anything here. We don't know why we're doing this.
Well, Chris, that's to me, the key point in this. You can start an investigation with little, if any, proof. The issuance of a grand jury subpoena is a formality. You quoted Edward Bennett Williams' famous remark about indicting a ham sandwich. This is much less than that. I mean, the subpoenas are really at the behest of the United States Attorney or whomever is in the grand jury. But what the key fact is here, as far as I'm concerned, is that this proved early on to be a dry hole. The investigation, however many there were, the ones related to Swalwell and Schiff and others on the committee were in that package. They were held to be languishing, and the Attorney General then said, let's amp this up and move these on. And it was an outsider who was charged with doing it. He came by virtue of an endorsement from the United States Attorney in New Jersey, who was the guy who the Attorney General wanted to shift over to the Southern District of New York to oust an incumbent who was feared to be investigating things that related to the president. So it's indicative of the fact that Mr. Barr worked with a staff close to himself. We'll find out more from the Inspector General about what career people might have done. But I think you'll find that there were senior career people who might have advised helpfully in cases like this who were never contacted at all.
Well, that's an interesting point. So the people being kept out of the circle, in addition to people who were in the circle on the workman level, saying that they had misgivings. Peter, another point that Mike Mukasey made, and again, I got a lot of respect for the former AG. And he says, well, Bill Barr only wanted to go after leak investigations in general, so he may not recall these specific ones. I just believe that knowing Barr, if he had a good explanation for what was going on, he would offer it. And the only time he's gone to this I don't recall device was in political sticky situations where he wanted to separate himself, like whether or not Trump ever asked him to investigate, and he used it one other time, I think. Wouldn't he do better than he's doing on I don't recall?
Chris, I don't recall is the refuge of a man who doesn't want to tell the truth. Look, let's think about this. One federal judge has already found in writing that Bill Barr lacked candor. A second federal judge described his interactions in the Department of Justice with regard to the Mueller report memos as being disingenuous. That's our baseline. And then let's think about Bill Barr, who personally, as the Attorney General, got on a plane with John Durham and flew all over the world pursuing these tinfoil hat, crazy conspiracy theories about the deep state. Given that level of interest, given that background about his level of credibility, there is no doubt in my mind that Attorney General Barr was absolutely well aware of what was going on. It doesn't matter that these were authorized in advance of his tenure as the Attorney General. The fact of the matter is he arrived on scene, and like so much else, the investigation of Mike Flynn was not languishing. He selected somebody who was put in there, turned that upside down in one of the gravest miscarriages of justice that I've ever seen. The sentencing of Roger Stone was not languishing. He put in a handpicked person to turn that upside down and reduce that sentence. That is Attorney General Barr's MO. He picks people who can come in, place undue political pressure to achieve the results that he and then President Trump wanted to achieve.
Gentlemen, thank you for your perspective on this. Appreciate it. We'll have more to discuss as we get into the interior parts of how this was done and why it was. And it will be coming because they're still at the DOJ, the people who did it. All right, I wonder what members of Trump's party make of this. Well, here's our first indication. You hear that? Nothing. Only Chuck Grassley came out and said, investigating members of Congress, not unusual. True, but it's usually because there's proof that you are using to initiate curiosity, not the opposite. But we have a lot to discuss with the next U.S. member of Congress. He is on the right side of the aisle, and consistently so, including support of President Trump. In fact, he met with him yesterday. He has a beef of his own. And by the way, I got a small beef with him, which we'll take care of first. Let's get after it. Next. Our next guest is a Republican congressman who supports the former president, even met with him yesterday. Is that why the Congressional Black Caucus won't let him in? Please meet Congressman Byron Donalds. Good to have you on Primetime, sir.
Good to be with you this evening.
First things first, you know I don't duck people, right? Just by reputation. You know that. I had breaking news. We went to your team. I said I'd have you on ASAP, and here you are. All right? So we good?
Oh, no, we're good. Listen, that was just a little bit of Twitter love, just a little jab, but, we're good. It's good to be with your show this evening.
I'm telling you, the less you are on that toxic place and the less you get caught up, you ever look at the people who are on your thread and Twitter, you want to know why the CBC has a problem with you. You got the hate parade following you on Twitter. There are people who are into some ugly ideas that I really hope you don't support, even if they are somehow an appendage of your party. But I want you here to have a fair hearing on what you say your problem is, all right?
Sure, fair enough.
First, let's see if you can help your case with the CBC folks. They have not been specific about why they don't want you on, except to say, we want to work with people who share our policy aims and means. We'll get to what that means as a suggestion about you in a second. But when you look at what is happening here with the DOJ, can you admit that it smells bad, what is coming out of this reporting?
Well, look, I got a chance to read the New York Times article from yesterday and even the one today. I think it's important for everybody to understand that the Department of Justice at the time did take this to a grand jury. After that, you have to let the Inspector General finish the investigation. One of the things we got to be very careful of is jumping to conclusions based upon one report that came out of the New York Times, because how many people were actually quoted? What are the detailed level of sources? Let the investigation run its course. If the subpoenas were unjustified, that will come out in due time. One of the things, being a member of Congress, do you want to hear about your phone records being taken? No, you don't. But you have to let these investigations take their course. We got to be very careful, Chris, not to jump to conclusions, because that's how these narratives get built that actually end up being false in the long run.
But guys only say what you're saying right now when they're on the short side of the stick. This isn't what your brothers and sisters in the party were saying when it was about Carter Page, right? Then it was, these people are going after him with a FISA warrant. It was all so wrong. But we know that a grand jury subpoena is nowhere near the level of scrutiny you need to get a FISA warrant. And just because the bar here isn't whether or not the grand jury subpoenas were warranted, that's a very low bar of probative recognition. It's that they kept expanding and kept looking even after senior staffers said there's nothing here. That's the suspicious part, and they just happen to be the people that President Trump hated most.
Well, two things on that point. Number one, I speak for myself. What people say in the party, that's up to them. Number two, as somebody who is actually pretty conservative, we'll talk about that in the next part of this interview, I've always been concerned about FISA warrants, and not just when it comes to situations like that, but across the board since the Patriot Act was passed. So that's been my position when it comes to FISA. But again, all I'm saying is this is new information. We haven't even had an opportunity for it to be fully investigated. There's been no other sources that have come forward to my knowledge. I'm not the reporter. I don't know what they have. But one thing we also got to keep in mind, if you go back to 2017, 2018, there was a lot of information out in news media that you couldn't just pick up on Reddit pages dealing with the Russia probe.
True.
The other thing that we do know is that for all the talk about Russia collusion, it really came up to nothing.
It came up to nothing
if you have
criminally.
a situation where Department of Justice, but hope it came up to nothing, because if you had something, you would have pressed charges, right? You didn't, so
No.
it came up to nothing.
No,
but
no,
let's be very clear
I don't
on
believe.
this. Hold on, let me
I
one second.
I don't believe in the standard of a felony or it's fine. Collusion is behavior, not a crime. I know you know this. You're a very sophisticated member of Congress, and that's another reason I want you here. But we don't have to go backwards. Let's go forwards. I have no problem with having more of a probe. Here, I'll give you your chance to make your case. The CBC's argument against you has to be that they are about fighting for things they think are good for Black Americans. And highest on their list right now is securing voting rights. And you are against the For the People Act and the George Floyd Justice and Policing Act. And that has to be a predicate for this. And look, he's not about what we're about. It's not just about color. It's about the content of what policies you want. And they have offered admission to other Republicans who are people of color before. So it's not like some blanket bar of anyone who's not a Democrat. What do you say about the fact that you reject those two policies? Last word to you.
First of all, when it comes to the For the People Act, it would destroy election laws in all states across the country. In Florida, we have the best election law in the United States. Our elections were done by 9:30 on election night. So why would I, as a member of Congress from the state of Florida, allow Washington, D.C. to completely eviscerate the best voting laws in the country? Number two, when it comes to the George Floyd Act, when it comes to police reform, there's a lot of police reforms that I actually do support. But the one thing I don't support is getting rid of qualified immunity. If you get rid of qualified immunity, it will mean less officers on the streets, especially in the urban communities like the one I grew up in.